So let's get some clarity, if we can now, on the conflict over the Coastal GasLink pipeline and the decision-making process in the WETSUWETEN First Nation. Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond is the director of UBC's Indian Residential School History and Dialogue Centre. She's a law professor and a former Provincial Court Judge. We've reached her in Victoria. Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond, great to see you again. Thanks for making time for us today.
It's great to be with you again.
Can I start by getting your perspective on the federal government's handling of this conflict so far, the blockades, the rest of it? What do you think of what you've seen here?
Well, I think like a lot of others, I saw that this is going to be coming for some time. I think in the first Trudeau government, there was a lot of talk and not a lot of action, and they didn't make progress. And it's been brewing for some time, particularly for the WETSUWETEN. And I think that they've been fairly absent from the issue. I know they've been engaging and saying they're talking. I think the time for talking is very important for deeper dialogue, but it's actually a time for change. And particularly for WETSUWETEN, you know, making some movement on their title claim and their title issues is long overdue.
Okay, so how do you think that unfolds? Everybody's now talking timelines and deadlines and the need to move quickly. How do you think it has to unfold?
Well, I think that they need to, I am in agreement that this is an issue about leadership as well. And the WETSUWETEN, both the hereditary chiefs and the elected chiefs in the region, you know, they feel very much like their issues have been dealt with for a long time. And I think it's fair to say that they haven't been. I think we need some senior leadership in the Government of Canada and British Columbia. I know they have ministers and others opening dialogues, but I do think the Prime Minister and Premier are going to have to make themselves available to personally give that kind of goodwill and also bring a resolution to at least some of the title issues. I mean, we need to recognize the WETSUWETEN title. The hereditary chiefs need to have a key role in deciding how to protect and support the lands. And that needs progress. And you know, the Delgamuukw decision was a long time ago. It's overdue, so I'm hoping to see some movement there for them. In terms of all of the other issues across Canada, you know, many First Nations people are very disappointed that things haven't progressed. And there's a lot of simmering, outstanding matters and claims, especially on the resource extraction side. And I do agree with Grand Chief Stuart Phillip. It's probably going to be a pretty long, hot summer unless they make some definitive progress quickly.
Okay, let's. I want to drill down, if I can, on you talked about title and you talked about the different, you know, who's involved in the decision-making process. And I think for many Canadians trying to follow this conflict, it's now come down to one sort of central question in a lot of ways. How come some of the hereditary chiefs insist that they have greater power to block the pipeline than the elected band councils in the same First Nation who support the pipeline? Help us with that.
Well, first of all, the Indian Act bands were created by the federal government and that governance structure was imposed. However, after more than 100 years, that has been the vehicle through which money comes and programs and so forth. It's never been the choice. It wasn't the government that the First Nations picked, and the WETSUWETEN or Gitxsan or others, they didn't pick that. That was imposed. But anything that's imposed for 100 plus years becomes normalized. And business often deals with the Indian Act bans and does impact benefit agreements. The actual nation, in this case, the WETSUWETEN Nation, that's the hereditary leadership structure. It's their political system that has been in place forever. It survived residential school process. It survived the imposition of the Indian Act. And that's a very significant because it more reflects their nation as a broader people who experience being chopped up into these individual bands and also having their lands not recognized. So the hereditary leaders have a significant role for the entire territory. But I think one of the key things is for people to stop saying, well, you have the elected chiefs, you have the hereditary chiefs. You have to create a bit of space for elected and hereditary chiefs being supported in a system that affirms their existence and identity to pick their Indigenous governing body, to mandate it and to go forward. And because the federal government has been so slow for so long to make progress, they're not divisions so much as they're a normal process of working out these issues. So instead of rushing in and saying, work with this person, work with that person, everybody knows if you do a business deal with an Indian Act band, It's fine to do that, but you still have that traditional leadership structure that you have to work with.
All right. So, what like in terms of next step is this? I mean, the federal government, I think you're suggesting, has a role to play here, but is this really in the sort of short time frame I think people are looking at, and maybe it's going to need a much longer time frame, but this project's sort of waiting to get done. There's a dispute over whether it has proper approvals or not. There's lots to talk about here. So in that short term, is this something that can be resolved by the Wet'suwet'en Nation itself?
Yeah, they need some space to do that. But in the meantime, there are a lot of things that can be done. I mean, this is a clear message to the federal government that it's not just a British Columbia provincial issue. It's a national issue. You know, again, I think the attention's come back to Trudeau's speech from February 14th, 2018, where he promised really significant path-breaking change to allow there to be space for First Nations to work this out, work their governing structures out without the, jackboot of colonialism on their neck, and to also get some support in terms of their resources and their title. And so, we need some federal movement on that. And it has to be more than just a speech in the House of Commons. We need recognition legislation. We need UN declaration legislation. We need some real policy shifts, and we need some leadership. And for the Wet'suwet'en, I'm not speaking for them, but it's so obvious that they need their title affirmed and recognized. And they need, I need to be able to go to the Hazelton Land Registry, look it up and see they actually have some Wet'suwet'en title.
So does that suggest shelving this Coastal Link gas line pipeline project till that gets fixed?
I think the challenge is that the Coastal GasLink pipeline, it came from another era, if you like, and we're shifting into a very different paradigm and era where you can't just railroad. And then, of course, the injunction and using the police and so forth, these are just tactics that are just not going to be tolerated anymore. So I'm not in a position to say what should be shelved. I do think we need to pause. I do think it's fair to talk about whether there's alternative routes. I do think it's fair to talk about whether or not you can get, and it's not social license, that's too narrow of a concept, whether or not you can get agreement and resolution. And I'm a person that believes firmly that you can get agreement and resolution, but it depends who you send and what they go with.
All right.
And if they're just talking to them, let's just keep talking. I mean, for First Nations in Canada, people have been talking to them about their land problems for 150 years. It wasn't until they went to court and started suing people that Canada was even willing to have a serious conversation. And they've been they've been ragging the puck for years and years.
Okay, let's finish on this, and it's a slight diversion to another topic, but clearly related. A number of organizations in BC have asked the chairperson for the Civilian Review Commission of the RCMP there to investigate the actions of the Mounties on Wet'suwet'en territory, alleging the force overstepped the injunction from the BC Supreme Court. That answer has been relayed to the organizations. We expect to hear it tomorrow at a news conference in British Columbia. You'll be part of that. Can you give us some idea of what we should expect to hear about the RCMP's actions here?
Well, I'm hoping to hear something that the RCMP takes it seriously. I think we've seen often that these injunctions are granted, like narrow injunction, like for instance, for access to the, Morris Forest Service Road in the case of Coastal GasLink. And that then you end up having RCMP overhead and coming out of the bushes, and they're everywhere. And so the issue about occupying this kind of security state when you have an injunction, it's a delicate issue. And I think you're going to hear tomorrow that it's serious. And we've seen this with a lot of injunctions, even the injunction that the Speaker of the BC legislature got. If you read it closely, it says, the protesters can't go anywhere where a minister habitually goes. What? The ministers in Starbucks, they can't go there? I mean, you have to really be careful about when you bring police action in, and it's Indigenous territory in particular. You can't be overly broad. And I think that the complaint was an important one, and I hope that the RCMP takes it very seriously. And we'll be exploring that further tomorrow.
All right, Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond, always good to get your perspective. Thanks so much for talking to us again today, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you. You have a good day.